Project TMA, Microsoft Project Training and Consulting Services, Australia-wide. In a lot of the training we do, the term critical path comes up a lot, and we find that there's often a misunderstanding about exactly what the critical path is. Given that one of the primary functions of Microsoft Project is to identify tasks on the critical path, we've put together a little video to give you an overview of what this means and what it means to your project. Let's start off with a simple definition of critical path. Critical path is the longest sequence of activities in a project plan which must be completed for the entire project to be completed. This is in fact the minimum amount of time needed for the completion of the project. Now that sounds almost contradictory, so the best way to have a look at it is on a Gantt chart. In this example, we're writing a manual which has 2 chapters. We have to create the first chapter as well as creating the second chapter, and the document complete milestone is the longest time it takes to complete both the first and the second chapter. And as we can see, the first and the second chapter will be created concurrently. The easiest way to show those tasks which are on the critical path is to go to the Format tab and select Critical Tasks. You can see now all of those tasks which are critical highlighted in red. The thing to remember here is that Microsoft Project calculates the critical path. In this case, it looks at the entire Create First Chapter phase, and it checks out the collective duration of those tasks and how they're linked together, and it compares it to Create Second Chapter. And it can see that the end milestone for Create First Chapter will take longer to complete than Create Second Chapter. The end milestone of the entire project, which is Document Complete, is driven by both Chapter 1 Complete and Chapter 2 Complete, whichever takes longer. And at this point, it's the Chapter 1 Complete end milestone that is driving Document Complete. Therefore, it's on the critical path. Note, we didn't dictate that the first phase, which is Create First Chapter, was going to be on the critical path. We just linked everything up, and Project then told us what was going to be on the critical path. Because Create Second Chapter is not on the critical path, we find that there's a gap between the Chapter 2 Complete milestone and the Document Complete milestone. This gap is referred to as slack, and it's the number of days that second phase, Create Second Chapter, could blow out by before it starts to affect the critical path. In this case, there are 4 days of slack between the Chapter 2 Complete milestone and the Document Complete milestone. Now, that doesn't mean that the first phase, which is Create First Chapter, will always be on the critical path. Things can change. In this case, if we re-estimate the duration of Task 9, which is Write Initial Draft, and we say, well, instead of taking 4 days, that might take 12 days, that may affect things. So if we change the duration from 4 to 12, we can see that now Create Second Chapter is on the critical path, and Create First Chapter has been removed from the critical path. And because Create First Chapter is no longer on the critical path, it now has some days of slack between its milestone, Chapter 1 Complete, and the Document Complete milestone. This is important to us because if we're assessing our project and we want to know what we can do to bring the project to completion quicker than expected, we're going to want to identify tasks that are on the critical path, and those are the tasks that we want to shorten the duration of. And it's also important to remember that for the critical path to be a correct representation of what tasks are on the critical path, everything needs to be linked up correctly. If you have a Gantt chart that hasn't been put together correctly, there's a reasonable chance that the critical path that Project might display by you ticking that tick box that says critical tasks will in fact be wrong. For more information about our Microsoft Project training courses and consulting services Australia-wide, contact us on 1300 363 822 or visit us at projecttma.com.au. microsoft.com.au.